Good afternoon. This is the Board of Commissioners 2021 Budget Workshop. We are meeting on May 7th electronically. And Mr. Peterson, I will turn it over to you in the form of an introduction, and then we'll dive into it.
Okay, well, certainly like to thank everybody for being here. As we met last Thursday, we went through the general fund and talked about revenue projections and what we had proposed in the general fund in terms of expenditure reductions and the reallocation of some monies from FY 20 to 21 in order to get a budget together for FY 21. So today what we're going to go through are all of the other funds with the exception of schools and water sewer. So this will be a lot of the enterprise funds and some of the smaller funds that we deal with, but that are a part of our budget. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our budget director, Dustin Thompson, and ask Dustin if he would walk us through the presentation we've got. And if you've got questions, please ask us whatever questions you may have, and we'll be glad to get you the information you need. Dustin?
Thank you, sir. I'm going to share my screen that has the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll get started. I'm going to start out with some of the smaller funds, and then we will get into stormwater, solid waste. Just a reminder to everybody, especially the enterprise, for the enterprise funds, the 12.2% increase in insurance that is being picked up by the city, and also a reduction in the budgeted cost for fuel. It's obviously a big deal for solid waste and transit. Starting out in community development, if you got any questions, please let me know. As we start out on some of these smaller funds, there's really not a lot to talk about. So it may be easier to answer questions as opposed to just talking a lot. If you have any concerns or information you need on this slide. Okay.
I would point out one thing. The public facility money on that slide is the money that was allocated in the current fiscal year for the neighborhood improvements around Langston.
Yes.
That's being rebudgeted to next year to do those same improvements.
Yes, sir. And this is a more detailed breakdown of the previous slide. This was part of the ad that was in the paper last Saturday.
Did we get this emailed to us? Because I can't find a copy in my email.
No.
Okay. Will we get an email to us? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. We can. I can definitely email that to you afterwards.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you. The next is the drug fund. These funds are used for supplies, for special investigations, for equipment, all related to drug enforcement here in the city. And here is a more detailed breakdown.
Okay. These expenditures can only be for investments that are used to deter drug activity. So that's the reason that you're seeing special investigations, firearms, those types of things. Sometimes we'll buy vehicles out of this fund for drug interdiction purposes. Canines are bought out of this fund, those types of things. But the expenditures are limited to items that can be used in the fight against drugs.
Yes, sir. Next is the Police Technology Fund. This funds software lease and maintenance within the police department. Also, it funds the police car cameras, the cameras for the new police cars. Those are funded through this. And we have, in the general fund, we have 11 new police vehicles budgeted. I say cars, they're SUVs now. So 55,000 of the 251 that you see on the screen there, 55 of that are cameras for those new police vehicles.
Peter, those are the cameras just standard
Dash mounted.
dash
Yes, ma'am.
mounted
Yes, ma'am.
cameras?
They are. And again, that police technology fund is a court-ordered fee that's attached to cases that run through municipal court. And those expenditures are limited to technology for the police department only.
There's a more detailed breakdown. This was also in the ad Saturday. Okay, the grant fund. One thing, this is the VOCA grant is included in this. The VOCA grant is the Family Justice Center grant. So it funds the 2 secretary positions down there and also funds some operating. So that's a big deal. That's very important in this grant, in the police grant fund. Also included are other grants that are smaller, the bulletproof vest grants, the JAG grants, the THSO and PSN grants are all included in this fund. But the big one is the VOCA, which is Family Justice Center.
Dustin, what is the amount? I think originally when the grant ran out, then we had to pick up about $80,000. Is it still in that neighborhood, or has that increased?
For 21, the VOCA grant is 97,000. And that will cover the salaries of the two secretary positions down there, and the balance of that picks up any operating costs.
I think at some point in time, Pete, it'd be good to get an annual report or something on the Family Justice Center.
Sure.
I know it's been a great addition to our community.
Okay.
But it'd be good to see what.
Okay, we'll get something lined up for the first meeting in June.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, next is Freedom Hall. And Charlie, if there's anything you want to add, please jump in. This is the basic revenue expenditure slide for FY21. Here is a little bit more of a breakdown, again, as appeared in the paper. Charlie, is there anything you need to say or would like to say?
Just since March, when the crisis came about, we have postponed or canceled 13 shows or events. We have been fortunate to reschedule about 9 to 10 events for this fall. So hopefully they may be realized later on in the end of the year. We don't know that, obviously, but that's what we're at least able to work with the promoter and move what we could. And some obviously had to be canceled, and many of those were directly related to John C. schools that do have concerts, and SGA ETSU concert at Freedom Hall.
The thing I would remind everybody, the ticket sales revenue line, all of that turns around and goes to the promoter, which shows up under expenditures under the shows line item. So when the revenue number goes down for ticket sales, there's a correlating offset in the reduction in the show's expense line item. We sell the tickets, accept the money, we turn around and give that ticket money to the promoter. And then out of that, they pay us the lease money that they owe us and the percentage on their novelties and the other expenses that we incur as a result of that. So that's really just kind of pass through money.
So Pete, if we're being optimistic, we're going to be able to come back and have shows even in the fall. That means, putting several thousand people inside of Freedom Hall, if we'll be allowed to do that.
Right.
If that doesn't happen, if we can't do that, what does that do to the budget for Freedom Hall?
Well, for ease of conversation, let's say we can't do any shows next year.
Yeah, until after the first of the year or something. like that.
Okay, let's just say Freedom Hall's closed for a year. Okay. The ticket sales line item goes to zero. The shows line item goes to zero. Okay, because you'll have no expense. Your maintenance number will be reduced fairly substantially because you're not going to be having a lot of maintenance. And if we went into a long period of nothing going on in the building, we would probably furlough those employees. There's 1, 2, 3 employees in maintenance, I think. And the administration line item would do the same thing. If the building's closed down, then we would repurpose those employees to a different fund or furlough them. So you're going to have some costs there, but the cost would be pretty minimal in comparison. The revenues and the expenditures pretty well offset each other. But that's not happening.
I hope not.
We're going to be full tilt here in about 90 days, and we're going to have college football. We're going to have college basketball. Jason Shea's going to make everybody forget Steve Forbes. Life's going to be good. Telling you, we're ready.
Good to hear that.
All right, Dustin.
Okay. Any more on Freedom Hall, Charlie? Anything else?
Sir.
Okay. All right. All right. Moving on to mass transit. Charlie and Eldonna, if there's anything you want to say, I'll point out to the commission the transfer from the general fund in FY21 is budgeted at $961,000. 66,000 and change of that is matching capital funds. The rest is operating subsidy. Excuse me. Charlie, Eldon, is there anything you want to say here?
We'll answer any questions that the commission might have.
My question, I hate to hog the conversation here, but if we get the money from the federal government for the grant that we're going to be applying for, how would it affect this budget?
It doesn't. The money coming, well, the federal, I'm sorry, I was getting two things confused. There's a state grant that's forthcoming that'll do school buses. The grant that's on tonight's agenda to apply for, Eldonna, is $2 million. You want to explain how that works, and if we receive that money, what expenses would be eligible under the terms of that grant?
Briefly, this is under the CARES Act, and this is relatively new for transit communities all across the country. This is what is called a split grant. This is the first, the amount that's on the agenda right now is part of the total we would receive. What is eligible is operating expenses. We started it, goes back to April 1st or somewhere in that neighborhood. We can use for the rest of this fiscal year, and then starting July 1 for operating expenditures in the 436 Mass Transit Code.
So that's not capital money?
We can use it for some capital, yes. But the greatest impact for the local budget and the general fund budget is that we have the potential to use less general fund money because the federal share, they're picking up more of the federal share. And we're working through those numbers and can have you a fairly decent estimate here in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, why don't you explain what capital equipment is included in this FY21 budget in mass transit?
The capital budget includes some paratransit vehicles that we buy on state contract, and just some usual things like office equipment, a new copier. We capitalize some of our maintenance cost of major repairs and things like that. Nothing in terms of mass transit. We're getting in the buses that we've ordered to replace our fleet of 2010 model buses. The delivery of those buses have been delayed because of the current situation. Some of the factory, they're not getting them off the factory line as quick. So we're just waiting on delivery of those. That money was appropriated in this year's budget. So the reason the capital number is less is because we've replaced our fleet. We're now looking at paratransit vehicles that cost a lot less than large buses.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on mass transit or any other questions for Charlie or Eldonna on mass transit? Okay, moving on. Now we're going to move into stormwater and solid waste. Phil, Andy, Hal.
We'll start with the Stormwater Fund. We handle anything that has to do with water quality, any federal regulations, that sort of thing. Applies to any new developments, etc. Next slide. Beginning cash balance is 2.5. I think it'll be higher than that. Today it's about 3. We have minor capital equipment. For the capital projects, let me just explain what they are. Oak Street is a neighborhood that's just upstream of where we're replacing the bridge on Baxter Avenue. And during a real heavy event, they get hit. So this is upgrading that stormwater system to minimize the flooding of 5 houses. Miller Lane is a project that we met with FEMA today, and we're going to be applying for a FEMA grant to cover 87.5% of the total cost of the project. So the project cost we estimated at $750 for construction. So we're probably looking at spending no more, reducing that by $650 to $700,000. So that project, we lost that bridge during the flood event of the 13th. So that one's moving forward. Austin Springs, we have two bridge structures downstream from Oakland Avenue. And the concept here is to build a road that goes around the two that affects 2 property owners. One of them is good to go for us to purchase, but the second, he's a little kind of obstinate and it might be a difficult negotiation. But the concept behind this is so that that road would never be closed during heavy rain events. The next project is Cobb Creek. This is around Brook Lane. We're having a lot of erosion that's occurring next to the creek. The flood affected it some. So we're actually going to apply for this project as well through FEMA and see how that cooks out. If we do nothing, we'll lose the road. We're talking to property owners about eliminating a structure in the creekway. We have one that's in agreement and one that's not right now. So we're drawing up some plans to show them what it would look like. The final project is Sinking Creek. A few years ago, the commission approved, depending on availability of funds, a program in which we go in and buy residential property built before 1980 that are located in floodways, not floodplains, but floodways. Sinking Creek has 5 structures in the floodway, and we have agreed, subject to your approval, the purchase of 4 of those structures. Paperwork signed, ready to take it to you whenever you want it. That's a great project because they do not have a means to flood-proof their structure. The water's all the way around them. So this is one way of eliminating flood hazard conditions. So that project is it's ready to go when everybody's ready to go. And finally, the West Walnut Street. We have 2 options on West Walnut Street to deal with trying to enhance the flood issue, mitigate the flood issue on West Walnut. In those 2 options, one of them is around 6 million, one is around 4 million. And so I've submitted everything to Pete. He's negotiating with the property owner. We should be coming to you in a short while as to the recommended final recommendation for the improvements to for the stormwater system as it relates to Walnut Street. Any questions? If not, next one.
Okay. That's all on stormwater. So if there are any other questions of commission, otherwise we'll move on to solid waste.
All right, but before we get to solid waste, I would like to point out, we had planned on beginning construction on Walnut Street next year. That project is not in the 21 budget due to the uncertainty of revenues. We went ahead and budgeted $4 million for West Walnut Street. That will, in the stormwater budget, there's, as Phil pointed out, there's some property acquisition we need to do. So having this money available would put us in a position to go ahead and acquire the properties that we're going to need to do the construction. The construction design is underway. So Phil, a couple of questions you can follow back up on. When do we expect construction design to be done? And give us a little more detail on, is it possible, whether or not it is possible to begin some stormwater construction prior to the actual streetscape work starting on Walnut Street?
Well, we talked about that. We had a meeting yesterday. As far as the construction sequence, the problem you have, if you go in there and try and do utilities on the front end, let's say you wanted to put the stormwater structures in, part of them are in Walnut Street itself. Or if you wanted to do the water and sewer line upgrades, you destroy the street. So if you can tolerate public outcry to do something or pressure yourself and force something to occur the following year, which may not be advised, we wouldn't necessarily advise it. You would be under enormous pressure to get the street fixed. We can pave it the best we can, but it's going to be, it'll be destroyed. No matter if you did the stormwater or the water sewer or both simultaneously. As far as the stormwater program, we always, on the 2 enterprises, we always project out 5 years. Stormwater is in great financial shape. We would say that at the beginning of the fiscal year, regardless of the previous slide you saw, we estimate that if we got the grant from FEMA, which we are very comfortable in saying that we will get it, we will have in the neighborhood of unobligated funds 2.7, 2.8 million to start the fiscal year. So we're in great shape. And so all these projects are all just cash based. The only project that's not, obviously, is West Walnut Street. but we are in such good fiscal shape with the fund that whatever that capital expense is going to be, we'll have to borrow the money for it. Will be in excellent condition to handle that. So you have nothing to worry about. We very much appreciate your raising the rates previously. That really helped. We wouldn't be able to do that project or essentially any of these projects if it wasn't for that.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So that $4 million will allow us to do property acquisition and potentially some building demolition that would be required on a couple of those properties, or at least one of those properties for sure. All right, no other questions. Take on with solid waste, please.
Well, as you know, we pick up everything in the city and in the county, so this is kind of a repeat. Just for your information, the impact that COVID has had, the residential, we have obviously we have the four services. Residential collection inside the city, we're probably losing approximately $15,000 a month because there's a 30% increase in the amount of garbage that the residents are, because they're having to stay home, have to throw away. So we have to absorb that cost. So that's on a per month basis. On the commercial side, those are like the 8-yard containers. On the commercial side, we're losing again 15 to 16,000 in revenues on the commercial side. The thing is that a lot of that is are heavy users like restaurants. So when restaurants are throwing waste away, that particular element of the program picks up the garbage fee at the landfill. And so we actually had a savings because that was about $28,000, whereas the loss of revenue was around 15, 16. So we actually netted out on the commercial side. On the industrial side, those are the large 30, 40-yard containers, the great big ones that you use in construction. And we did see a downturn in that just slightly. So we were losing about 10,000 a month, but it's picking back up. So actually the commercial industrial we're balancing out, and the residential is really the only place where we're actually at loss of revenues. Recycling, we debated for a while about whether or not to suspend the operations or not. Remember, you're running the longest running curbside program in the state. And after a lot of consideration, we didn't feel like we wanted to necessarily go through a suspension and then come back and pick it back up. We figured that we would lose customers, etc. The markets for the products are actually going up. And so Hal and his staff is actually, we're playing the markets on cardboard, etc. With the markets going up, he's trying to play when to sell the products. But the markets for us are stable. Don't be alarmed when you hear neighboring cities suspending their operations. And the reason they're doing that, either they just refuse to subsidize anymore and just eliminate the program, or their operation is what we refer to as a single source collection. It's where you put a container out in front of the house and a truck comes by and picks up the container, no matter what's in it. They don't look at it, nothing. Well, what happens is they're commingling everything. And then those products are then taken and shipped to the same, in a lot of cases, same market that we're using in Knoxville. And they're getting out because in that in that type of collection where they have to do all the separation, they first found problems with glass. So they eliminated glass, what, 8, 9 months ago. Then the commingling, if you ever watch people throwing things away, they don't do a very good job necessarily in really getting a clean product in the container. So that's really contaminated. So they, what the material recovery facilities were doing was not only were the cities having to pay for the transportation to get it to them, but then they were not paying them because a lot of that was going to a landfill. And the material recovery facilities in Knoxville, the landfill in Knoxville was getting a lot of that product. Then they turned around and said, we're really losing money. So they were, I think in Kingsport, they were going to charge them an additional $35 a ton. So Kingsport was faced with the same transportation costs we had. They weren't getting any revenue they were probably paying before. And now they were confronted with another increase. And so when you add all that up, they were probably paying out $85 a ton is my guess. And that's happening across the state. Ours is different because we separate it at the curb. That presents an issue with the people doing the collection, particularly during the COVID. So what we've said to our employees is if you suspect something, don't touch it, leave it. So if people are throwing tissue papers and stuff like that in the container, they don't touch it, and we'll back them up. But for the most part, everything is moving very well. Materials costs are material revenues are going up. Next slide.
Oh, Phil, before you go on the brush, leaf, and yard, I know we closed that to the public last year. Are we getting in a position where we might be able to reopen that?
No, actually, Domtar, who is our end user or the end user, they've shut their plant down. We're not sending anything to them. And that will be like that. That's been like that for a month since this whole thing started. They had to shut down. There was no, they lost all of their contracts, and so they just shut the plant down. And they don't plan. I don't think we plan to start sending them anything back until June, mid-June, July, and that depends on whether or not they can reinstate contracts, which I think they will. So not by, for everybody's benefit, we were doing 15,000 roughly a year. When we cut out the outside, that dropped it down to about 9 or 10. And that frankly is really the number that Domtar has said to us that they would accept. So even if I were to change this, or we were to change this to accept everybody, we'd have a hard time getting rid of it, simply because right now we're balanced on the receiving end. So I think I like it the way it is. It gives us total control over the site, gives us some options to work with.
I think the big challenge is for our landscaping companies. What do they do with our citizens' brush and leaf and yard clippings and all that kind of stuff that they have to dispose of? And where do they take that then?
Some of it's going to the compost facility out on Woodland, and the balance of it, I do not know where they're taking it.
Yeah, it's a problem. I received a call a couple of weeks ago from one who's really kind of desperate, and I think even Bright Ridge is having problems with. We actually take Bright Ridges. You take. They don't have a problem. City.
Inside the city.
what they cut in the city. We don't want to take what they're cutting in Sullivan or Carter or Greene County or
What
whatever.
Jeff told me is just the work that they do for the city. They can
I'll
take
let
it.
Phil
Okay, we don't have to get in that
yeah,
discussion,
yeah.
but it is an issue, and you know, even landscaping companies, they're doing work for our citizens who pay, you know, the refuge fees.
I mean, the thing we've got no place to put it either.
I know.
Uh,
We have any
Phil
other property where it can go?
Phil, can't they take brush up to the Carter County demo landfill?
I think Jonesboro takes a little bit. So my guess is some of the counties going there, the farmers are taking it. The reason the farmers are taking it, they get a fee, so it's kind of a revenue source for them. They also use it to break rock on their land. That's the way they changed land 200 years ago. You would pile brush, burn it, and it breaks the rock in the ground to make so that then you can have tillable ground. So a lot of farmers are doing that. They use it for a revenue source as well. That's the way it used to be done before our first landfill just for everybody's information. First landfill that we used was at Civitan. But if you go to the properties around Civitan, the farmers were actually selling that for, you know, charge them a couple of dollars a ton. That's what they're doing now with brush. They're just, farmers are making, or whoever's making the money. Selling it.
Thanks, Phil. Again, it's probably a challenge. Maybe someday we can solve it.
Next slide. This is one you've seen before. Everything's pretty steady on the cost, so we're good to go. Now, keep in mind on that previous slide, the cost per household is $16.24 a ton
Why has it gone up so much this year, Phil?
per month. It has something to do with what we've purchased, what we've upgraded. These numbers, to me, are pretty much stationary.
Hey, Phil,
Remember, it's $16 a month, but we're charging 11. So the residents are getting a great deal for $11 a month.
Phil, what's the deal with the recycle going up 9 cents? Do you hear me?
Yeah. It's gonna just slightly fluctuate based on how much repair we've done to trucks or how much gas we use, that sort of thing. It's not a big deal. That one's not a big deal. When I dropped from, if you look at 17, 18 to 18, 19, that one dropped a little bit because we changed the collection of mixed paper.
Right.
Rest of it's probably has something to do with 4% cost of living adjustments and that sort of thing. Now, with fuel prices down, that would go down, so we're good to go. Commercial collection, pretty much the same. Next, industrial, looks like a big jump. That has something to do with just the maintenance, et cetera, of the trucks they're getting. Here, we try to buy a truck a year. And if we ran into a glitch with some truck with heavy expense, it's going to affect the number. Next. Recycle program, I'll go back. The overall tonnage, it dropped a little bit. Curbside programs, your big cost, and it is for everybody. That's not an unusual thing.
Phil, why the big cost on the drop site expense side?
I would call it low revenue for those materials. The type of materials that weigh a lot, glass, which brings us very little money. That's a lot of your costs that come out of those sites. And the fact that we're still running the same trucks trying to collect material that is, not paying us very much anymore.
Yeah, we may have increased the frequency to keep the clutter down. So if we were collecting, say we were collecting 3 times a week, we may have gone to 5 times, runs the cost up. When I look at all these numbers, and here's the bottom line to finances, we operate off of cash flow. So we're buying all the equipment, everything essentially with cash. So what we do is we project that over 5-7 years. We're good for 5 years, and then we're going to have a problem. So somewhere in that 5 years, we're going to have to start adjusting rates. We still have the lowest residential, commercial, industrial. They're all low. So we got maneuvering room. We're not proposing anything. I'm just saying that there's plenty of room to maneuver over a 5-year period. You don't wait until the last year to do it. Somewhere in that 5 years, we're going to be coming back to you to raise revenue so that we won't be running into a problem at year 5 or year 6 is when we think we have a problem. But we'll give you better information so as the next budget cycle comes around. Right now, we're in great shape. Regional is same way.
Yeah.
Regional is everything in the county. So we're good
Yeah.
there.
I will echo what Phil says about regional and municipal and stormwater, what he said earlier about stormwater. As we sit here today, those 3 funds are in great shape. Are there any other, this is the last slide for solid waste. Are there any other questions of Phil or Andy or Hal in relation to solid waste or stormwater?
Dustin, explain what the transfers out are.
Okay, I told you a lie. Sorry. There is one more slide. It's for the equipment.
This is a very typical equipment. One of the knuckle booms, what our plan there is to replace 5 knuckle booms. We have a problem in our capacity in preparing streets for street resurfacing. We don't have enough trucks. So we're actually going to take 2 of those knuckle booms and change them out to handle asphalt hauling so that we can increase production there. Now, there has to be an expense on the general fund side to do that in order to get the beds in place. So that wouldn't occur until there's a general fund for equipment, of which there is none next year. But that's the sort of the concept of how we mix and match equipment to try to keep the costs to a minimum. And the rest of it is just changing out worn out equipment. We haven't changed leaf machines in a while, so.
My apologies. This is the last slide on solid waste. Are there any other questions of Phil, Hal, or Andy regarding stormwater?
I have a
or
question.
solid waste?
Are you sure this is the last slide? That would be
I
my
am
question.
now sure that this is the last slide on
Okay.
solid waste
Very good.
and stormwater.
Phil, does the knuckle boom include the trailer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We're actually seeing, Pete, right now we see an increase. People are just, they don't have any money. So they're taking if they're having to move out or something, they just take everything to the street and dump it. So we have a service to provide for large ticket items and to pick up these big beds and sofas and stuff like that. And so we actually use the older equipment and the knuckle booms on Thursday and Friday to pick all that stuff up. So that's actually an additional service on the residential side that isn't reflected in the previous numbers that you saw. So we need to upgrade the equipment in order to keep that operation moving as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all. The last few slides that we have are related to debt. We talked last Thursday specifically about general fund debt last Thursday. But what we said was the debt that we were going to issue in the current year, FY20, we've bumped to FY21. So that debt that's budgeted this year is rebudgeted in 21 and will be issued in FY21. With the exception, and this will be in stormwater, with the exception of the debt to be issued in the Stormwater Fund for West Walnut Street, there is no new debt to be issued. It's just carryover from the prior year. And wanted to give you just a breakdown. We talked about that, but we didn't go in a lot of detail about that. It was just one slide. And so wanted to give you a little breakdown on what is included in the proposed debt issuances for 21 now. In the general fund, as we talked about last week, it's the financial software and the fire truck. In PEP, it's as you see on the list there, the new one in here is the design for the classroom additions at the 3 elementary schools. In solid, I'm sorry.
I would point out the roofs, the parking lots, and the Liberty Bell project have already been done. The Indian Trail project has been designed and ready for bid. And this is the work that we had planned on getting done in FY20. And over the last 3 or 4, 5 months, we've talked about these 3 classroom additions at the 3 additions at the elementary schools have been added in the last 3 or 4 or 5 months. So we're going to have to issue this debt because a lot of this work's already either completed or in process of being completed.
Is the timeline being changed at all on these classroom additions?
The classroom additions, no. Anything beyond those 3 classroom additions is off the table right now.
And I'll just remind the commission, with the exception of the work at the 3 elementary schools, you all did approve a bond reimbursement resolution on June 6th of 2019. In addition, there's the additional $1 million for the work at solid waste. 2 has already been issued. There's another $1 million to issue, but that work it's either done or almost done. Phil could speak to that. And then the $2.4 million for the radios at Fleet Management, which you approved. I believe it was earlier this year. I can't remember right off the top of my head.
It'll be spread out to your cost. That's what everybody will pay their share.
So are there any other questions? Anything that's not in there that I needed to put in there or discuss? Well, Pete, I will turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Okay, that has gotten us through all the different aspects of the budget, as I pointed out earlier, with the exception of water, sewer, and the schools. And we've got those lined up for scheduled meeting next Thursday. Maybe the best thing to do at this point is just open it up to questions, comments. Is there a need for additional information on anything that we have covered to this point? Or is there a need to review anything that we went over today or last Thursday?
I think one, we touched on this a little bit last Thursday. You know, the possibility of funds coming in through the CARES Act and through some other things. We got notice of another opportunity here. CDBG money. And as we're looking at our recovery to the economy, how we use those funds as wisely as possible to kind of help stimulate, you know, growth in the community. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but we do have these funds coming in, and I just want to make sure that we're investigating the best we can on what we can do with them that may help our economy, you know, have a kickstart and get out of where we're going to wind up. We don't know where we're going to wind up. We don't know what our unemployment's going to be. We don't know what our GDP is going to be. We can only guess at this particular point in time. And that's the way you built this budget for 21. But, you know, how much discretionary money might we have in a budget if we look at all sources of revenue that may be coming in, that we can, you know, look at some kind of business development funding or something that, you know, the wisdom of this community can come back and say, if we do this, then we may not, you know, see as much of a downturn, or we can see us coming out of this a lot quicker. So I don't know when we can have those discussions or who we can talk to look at those kind of things.
I think it's really going to depend on what money becomes available to us. I mean, right now there's a lot of speculation, and they're continuing to write the rules of the grants and how those monies can be spent. So as you pointed out, we built a budget to take care of our basic operations and not diminish the service level we provide our citizens. And as we talked about last week, as more monies become available during the course of the year, we can do budget amendments and allocate those additional revenues. So we're certainly exploring all the options in terms of what grant funding we can apply for, and we'll be applying for all that we're eligible for. And as that money starts, as the final amounts start become known to us, then we can determine how we'd like to allocate those monies, obviously. Yes, ma'am.
If I may comment, there's some CDBG money tied into the CARES Act, and we're working on trying to allocate. We've got some interest from several agencies, and we're working on trying to get that something to you. There's $313,000 and change for Johnson City in that act. The requests we've gotten are considerably more than that, but we're trying to whittle that down to a more manageable number. There's also some extra CDBG money we could tag into that to increase that a little bit and hope to get something out. But what we'd like to do is get that list out to you sometime next week. And if you can kind of maybe scrutinize it, give us your initial thoughts up or down, and then we'll have to advertise it for 5 days. And then hopefully our objective is to try to get that on the 21st City Commission for approval. We haven't gotten the money yet. HUD, I believe, but last I heard, is still working on guidelines for how you can spend that money. Some things we've gotten requests for probably aren't eligible. But if you spend it on direct COVID-related expenditures, things that you're spending in food, supplies, things like that, I don't think there's any question that those would be eligible for that. But our intent, we're working with the Housing Authority, Preston and myself, to pull something together to get us started with that. So I hope to get that out to you sometime next week.
Thank you. And there's some additional flexibility in that money. I guess that's where the guidelines are coming in.
Some flexibility, but
Understand what it can be used for.
it's really tied to these agencies and, so, yes.
Thanks.
If I could add to the mayor's comment, just having watched the things that have come out of Washington with respect to the PPP and several of these others, those programs are having the rules rewritten literally every day. I'm kind of following some online conversations amongst small business people and different ones. And what you're being told today is different tomorrow, is different than last Thursday. I think what we really need to double down on is getting our strategic plan in order so that when we get the flexibility that Mr. Peterson alluded to, we have some overarching vision for how best to deploy those resources to their greatest impact, specifically for Johnson City.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Absolutely. And we're going to see the plan coming back to us. Bridge is just about to get that returned to us. I think just for the community at large, you know, we've all been focused on such negative stuff here lately and just so entrenched with virus thing. I think we have to continue to give our message of growth and hope for the community. And we stick to, you know, our vision of where we see Johnson City really being a strong player. I was speaking with Mitch Miller this morning, and they are getting a lot of wind that people in larger cities dealing with the virus and the density of the cities are beginning to look at moving out. And so if we can become one of those destinations for remote workers or whatever that might be, and so how we market ourselves and the fact that we may need to invest some money in marketing going forward, you know, could be one of those plays that we really go after.
Yes. Hey, Jenny, I think I mentioned about reading an article about that at our last meeting 2 days ago, or maybe a week ago. I can't remember, but absolutely. I think, you know, the city and the CVB could really capitalize on that opportunity. And speaking of Mitch, I know Mitch and the Washington County mayor were just at the mall while we've been in this meeting, really promoting business and having consumer confidence as one of the things that they are trying to push. And I think that's definitely great to see that support from the Washington County mayor.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think our message going forward needs to be, you know, very future related.
Absolutely. Any other budget questions out there? Well, that brings us to the conclusion of what we needed to cover today with the budget. If there's no other questions, we will reconvene at 6 for the regular city commission meeting scheduled for today, and look forward to seeing all of you then.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.